All right, so we are recording. This is Joe Miyake and with David Couper today for the podcast Operation Long Game. Basically, this podcast has two goals. One is looking at the long-term game of just creating community solutions. And then the second thing is actually looking at kind of one's own individual character development, career development, and how we try to pursue our own goals. Anyways, this is part one of the talk, just talking about the community, in particular policing. David's got quite a ton of experience with that. David, could you just give some background on your experience? And then I'm also hearing some background.
Are you sure?
Oh yeah. My wife had some surgery here, so I'm in her room now, and there's a nurse in the background. So anyway, this is a real time. Okay. So
yeah, very much so.
So they'll be leaving shortly, and
it's all right.
So anyway, well, I go back a long ways. I mean, here I am in my my 8th decade, and so I started policing in 1960 after 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. Really took a policing job so I could go to the university and get my degree. And I was planning on going back in the Marines as an officer. That was my goal. And so I got this job in this police department. I really liked the work. And it's kind of interesting starting your policing career in a wealthy suburb, all white suburb, right? And guess what the standards are there? You better treat everybody respectfully. Using improper force to their kids. You better mind your P's and Q's. So that was my kind of baptism into policing, and I thought, well, we're here to serve people and to be respectful and use a minimum amount of force in doing the job. Then I went to Minneapolis in 1962 and was there 7 years and found a different culture. I think I was able to keep that perspective. We were hired by a large group of police officers at the time, a big referendum to increase the size of the police department. So we all of us who were sort of the college cops banded together. And we had a different attitude regarding the dominant culture at that time. But I quickly understood that every time there's a new mayor, there's not only new police chief, but all the way down the chain of command, everybody who supported the mayor that got elected found themselves in command positions for at least 4 years. And I said, I didn't want to work in a system like that. So a young city manager in another suburb of Minneapolis hired me to be the public safety director, chief of police, and fire chief of that newly growing area.
And we did some. Was that a neighborhood? Was that a neighborhood of Minneapolis?
Yeah. It's one of the second tier of suburbs to the south. Another, somewhat rural, but becoming very much a upper middle class, basically white community again.
Okay.
But the vision we had at that time with all the protests on campus was to hire exclusively college graduates, not necessarily anybody that had a criminal justice degree, though we did not discriminate against it, but we wanted a diverse group of people in terms of education and in terms of race as well. And then we said, we have a new image here. We're going to wear non-military uniforms. We're going to wear blazers with the department patch on the pocket, and be very kind of low-key in terms of image. It is uniform, but it's a non-military uniform. For example, airline attendants wear uniforms, but they have to be military uniforms. And then we started, looking at community policing. I think one of the first things in early '69 was to develop officer responsibility for individual neighborhoods. And rather than looking at time of day, we were looking at geography, turf. That
Okay.
somebody would be responsible, one person of the officers that worked in this area, one person would be responsible for looking at the big picture.
And then just question on that neighborhood comment. How much of a relationship were those officers able to develop within their neighborhood that was their responsibility, if I'm reading you correctly?
Well, it was very rudimentary, in which when I went to Madison 4 years later as the chief of police, we perfected that to the point that it was an intimate relationship between what we call neighborhood officers, not two officers. I found out very early in my career that if you want officers to relate to a community, one officer.
Huh.
You put two cops out on a beat. Guess who
Right.
they talk to? Each other, right?
Oh, so you had to do one officer, so
That's
that
right.
the
So you
only
put
thing
one-
they could do was
one
talk to the
officer.
community.
Exactly. They get lonely. They want somebody to talk to. They'll talk to the
Right.
people on the street. They'll talk to the store owners. They'll talk about the people that live there. So So that is the really, neighborhood. They talk about community-oriented policing, and they kind of look at city-oriented. But the only policing that really works as community-oriented policing tried to do was neighborhood-oriented policing. That was the one that really developed the intimate relationship between police and the people that live there.
Yeah, and then just to keep going on that, just from a managerial perspective, I mean, one officer per what? How big is the neighborhood, or what was the population? What was the geographic space that?
Well, they were predominantly areas in need of where there were a lot of police activity. So it tended to be poor neighborhoods, public housing neighborhoods, and business neighborhoods.
And then would that be like, how big of a space would one officer have as their geography? Or, how many blocks, or was that kind of hard to...
Yeah, it varied some, maybe like, 8 square blocks. I had a opportunity in Minneapolis, just going back to after Dr. King was assassinated and we had burning on the north side of Minneapolis. I was able to convince the captain of my precinct, who was a very progressive guy, that what we needed to do was to put a footbeat into the black neighborhood. And he said, well, we've never done that before. We've never had a footbeat in the black neighborhood. I said, well, how about if I do it? Because I knew we had to do something differently. We just couldn't be the occupying force in black neighborhoods. So my experiment was, well, send me down there, and it worked. Obviously, I come down there by myself. Well, I better depend on the community to help me. So I better start treating people with respect and respect their dignity. And lo and behold, we had a relationship. I worked out of the basically African American community center called The Way on Plymouth Avenue, and people began to trust me, and it began to work well. And I brought that experience with me when I left Minneapolis. I could do just a little bit in Burnsville because there was a lot of development going on, and it was just probably only about 20,000 people there at that time. And then to move into Madison, where we had a much 250,000 people and a bigger area. So I kind of picked up and learned this. At the same time, I had some great professors when I was at the University of Minnesota who were very, very much it was in sociology, but very much into the orientation towards deviant behavior. What is deviant behavior? How is deviant behavior controlled? Importance of research. All that was pretty much, part of my kind of learning by hard knocks.
Now, I want to go back to when you were the kind of the footbeat cop in the black neighborhood. How long was, first of all, just how long was that? How long did you do that for?
I think I had a few probably months in that. I'm trying to think back. Maybe it might have been a year.
Okay. And then
Probably
no,
that year, yeah. Because it was probably about a year.
okay, cool. And then from that, what were I'm curious around the best things that you did to build relationship, but then also, I mean, were there any big crimes that happened? Were there any big violent things that have happened, or was it a pretty quiet year?
Well, it was a pretty quiet year. I think everybody was recovering from the King assassination and
Okay.
destruction of the community and that. So it was probably a good time to go in there. I can give you a little anecdote here. So one of the things we had a very strict department rule that you had to wear your hat whenever you were outside your car. And so what I had to do is try to convince the captain that I was exempt from that rule, that I could go bareheaded. And well, why do you want to do that? And he said, I want people to know who I am. I don't want people to think I'm one of those bad cops out there. So I wanted to see it was me. I said, because I don't want to get shot out here because somebody's going to think I'm but I think it was a lesson that I learned. And then years later, when we had this massive block party that a few years earlier in Madison had turned into a riot between the police department and students, and tear gassing and arrests on both sides, that the officers who planned this, we talked about this, and they showed up individually into that neighborhood without hats. And the students coming for the party that day said, gee whiz, these cops are not working in twos and threes. They're by themselves, and they're saying, hi, hope you have a great party. So it kind of broke the expectation that, here we've got this block party first time since the wild one a couple of years earlier, okay. And the cops are acting differently. There's a new sheriff on the block.
Okay, gotcha. What I guess, let's see. So where in particular did we stop in your career? Like you were just going to university?
I was at becoming. Yeah. Okay. So I was at Burnsville about 4 years, and we had a policy. The idea was that we would have a management training program for the police who came with their degrees to be with us, and that turned out quite well. We had a number of officers that went on to be chiefs and sheriffs around the area, but I was selected to be the new police chief at the University of Minnesota, right in the midst of a campus strike a few years before that. So that was, 1970, 71, 70, 1970 and 71 were really big areas on campuses about the war in Vietnam. So
that was 1970 to 71 that you were police chief?
Must have been about, no, I didn't make it. This is a good story. So I was picked by a faculty student group to be the new chief of police of the campus of the University of Minnesota. Okay, and I went down there and I put all my personal papers, went to go, got all the stuff set up, and it was one thing. I just had to meet with the university president, who was named Malcolm Moose. Actually, he was a government official in the Eisenhower administration, and I had to meet with him. So okay, well, here I am. I'm ready. I told my boss I was leaving, and thanks and everything, and so I'm waiting, week after week, and so I called the personnel director. I said, "What's up?" Oh, just hang tight. He's gonna meet with you. And then the next day, I pick up the Minneapolis paper and said that the former union head of the Minneapolis Police Department, and one whom I locked horns with throughout my career in Minneapolis, had just been elected the mayor of Minneapolis. And he found out that I was going to be the new chief of police, and he wrote to the university president, and if you hire him to be your chief of police, then I'm telling you that I don't like him, and I'm not going to send any Madison or any Minneapolis police officers on campus to handle any of your disturbances. So,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
what does that sound like today? Who does that sound like?
I don't know, but it's
Yeah, populism has always been kind of a wave in American politics. So anyway, I called and said, well, what's all this about? And the student newspaper said, isn't this wonderful? This Couper guy, he's going to come on campus, and we're going to keep those bad Minneapolis cops off campus.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So that went on, and finally my boss put pressure on me. You better decide what you want to do, and so I hearing nothing from the university president, I withdrew my application, and then 2 years later I went to Madison. I sort of wanted to try out some of the things I was learning along the way here, and one of which was having formulated a way to handle campus protest or any type of protest that didn't involve a strong military force, but a very soft approach to negotiate, to put officers in soft clothes, many cases in blazers, to work with the protest organizers and say, hey, we're here to help you protest the government under your First Amendment freedoms. We're not the problem,
Right.
the issue. And that worked very well for us when I brought that into Madison for 21 years. We never lost a major protest, and we would have scores of them every year in just working with people. And then just a few years ago, Professor Clifford Stott in the UK, after looking at conflicts between British police and football fans, said that, hey, we've got some evidence that what he called the softly approach worked.
Okay.
So we didn't have any empirical evidence that this was working, but it worked for us in Madison, and we were championing this throughout the country, that this is the way to handle protest. I think we had some people, some chiefs across the country used it effectively, but Stott gave us the empirical basis in his papers and his work in the UK, that it's always better to start soft in handling any type of a protest, because, well, quite frankly, you can't, after you have a hard approach, go back and be the nice guys. You can't take off the helmets and the body armor and the shields after you're beating people up and say, well, let's try the soft approach now.
Yeah, so because then you've already lost trust with them completely. And
exactly.
Yeah. What I thought you brought up something interesting in kind of in our last call about the culture of Minneapolis policing, and the culture of kind of in us, like it becomes almost like a battle culture or something like that, right? Us versus them. Could you talk a little bit about just what you saw there?
Sure. And I think more recently, Radley Balco captured that in the rise of the warrior cop and the militarization of police.
Yeah.
And so there's a really strong culture in the organization on people who have to depend on each other, who really can exert muscle on young persons in the organization by saying, you do it my way, or I'm not going to show up on the call where you need somebody to help you. So that has a strong effect of kind of like young recruit comes out of the academy. He or she is very, very much in the idea of being a guardian and a helper. And those officers run into, hardcore warrior cops who say, do it my way or else. And I think we saw that in Minneapolis as Derek Chauvin was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. You saw the Asian officer being somewhat uncomfortable and shifting, that he was afraid to be able to step in and put a hand on Chauvin's shoulder and say, Oh, okay, Derek, I'll take it from now.
Yeah, and why do you think, in theory, you would think that coworkers wouldn't be afraid to take, to work together in a situation? Obviously, policing is different than a white collar job, but
Yeah, yeah.
what
But
dynamics are there?
remember, there's some evidence in other professions, and that is having to do with in medicine. And a few years ago, there was a study on the importance of checklists in medicine and putting in lines, central
Yeah, an
lines. Okay,
assessment.
yeah. So the idea was we developed this, and the doc that developed that, to make a long story short, is that he went to the medical director and said, "Well, we're not interested in that." He went to the insurer, went to the insurer of his hospital and said, "Hey, I've got a way to cut down on infections." And the insurer looked at, not even the medical person, says, "Hey, that makes sense. I'll give your hospital a call," and said essentially, "If you don't implement this checklist, we're not going to insure you." So that got the checklist into the rooms, but there was still a problem, and that is when doctors didn't follow it, the nurses felt reluctant. They couldn't say, "Doctor, did you forget this step?" And
Right.
only when they all got together, and the medical director said, "Doctors, if your nurse identifies to you that you haven't followed the step, you do what she says or he says."
Right.
And so even that culture in any type of hierarchical organization, I think we still have that problem.
And then did you ever see kind of that warrior cop culture? I mean, did you ever see it change in Minneapolis? Or has it been there the whole time since
Well,
in your 60 years?
yeah, I think it's been intensified. One of the things that I noticed Minneapolis did, and because I worked there for a while, and I knew a lot of the chiefs and everything, and even though what we push for, well, Minneapolis, get away from the politics, have a contract for your chief of police. Let's look at more civil service kind of things. Let's talk about a 7-year contract. Let's do A, B, and C, and D. It never stuck. It really never stuck. And one of the things that the recent chief has found out is that as the police department, and I ran into this in the 1980s, we were paying for training by outside people who were coming in, emphasizing the warrior cop culture, and essentially scaring police officers to death that everybody out there is in danger to you and they just want to kill you.
And that was a training?
Yes, it was training people. It was outside training people that we were paying money for. Yeah, I went to one of them because I wanted to see what my officers were doing. I went to one of those things on a Saturday morning that we were paying for, and I said, "No more. We're not doing this anymore." One of the videos that my wife's a retired officer too, and she remembers, is kind of like shoot, don't shoot situation. So here's an officer strolling down the pathway in a park, and ahead of him is a woman pushing a baby carriage. And as she gets alongside the officer, she pulls the gun out and shoots him. Okay.
Wait.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Got to be wary. Yes. You got to be wary at all times. People out there hate you and they want to kill you. Well, yeah. What does it do? I mean, so do you talk? Well, you got to watch out. Don't want to have a conversation with a lady with a baby carriage. Maybe she hates cops and she's going to shoot me. I mean, it is that type of atmosphere that is, change the hearts and minds of thousands of police officers. And there's another training out there that's around the circuit now. A guy who I think is a retired Army guy. It's like there's sheep, the sheepdogs and the wolves. There's wolves that you got to be out there. You got to be that tough sheepdog that keeps the wolves away and knows how to bite them.
Right. And what do you think? I mean, So you're saying that you never saw that culture ever change in terms of being less militaristic. If anything, it just became more and more militaristic over your 60-year career.
Yeah, I think that's what it's looked like, and I think that it would be fair to say that that is a trend that has happened in most large and medium-sized American cities since 9/11. 9/11 was a real major change, I think, in the attitude and the kind of orientation of America globally as well as internally in the domestic scene. We have military weapons. You know, we went from in 60 years. So what does this look like technology? Okay, my first training coming out of the Marines was I rode with a sergeant for 5 days. And at the end of that 5 days, he said, well, you got a couple of days off. When I came back to work 2 days later, he gave me the keys to the car, a ticket book, a map of the city, and a state statute book, and said, okay, your car number, whatever it was. And I took off driving out of the police station.
Right. So
thankfully, nothing ever challenged me. Thankfully, I had a chance to. So what the radio was in the car, no personal radio. I didn't have body armor, and I had a revolver with 6 shots in it. Fast forward to today. Police car with all kinds of technological equipment, personal radios, taser, semi-automatic pistol with multiple clips of ammunition that can be easily exchanged to try to take the 6 rounds out of a revolver and reload under pressure is a major physical and mental task. And so when you go to work and you get out of the car and you're maybe half a block away talking to people, I mean, you better have some social skills, because you irritate people there. They're gonna whoop your butt. You know, you've got that emergency radio. You can just push that thing and get an alarm, and people are going to know exactly where you are geographically, come to your aid. Yeah. When you're all by yourself out there, and you're away from your car, which your radio communication is, you know, right. you better have some emotional intelligence
just to deal with the community and not create problems and not be the villain in situations.
That's right.
How do you think, where do you think overall there's room for hope in policing? You know, is it smaller communities, are the big communities going to be kind of the most pain in the ass to change kind of thing? Yep. So that's why it's small, or what? Like, where do you think? Because everything's not going to change overnight.
Yeah, right? That's right. Well, accountability would make a really big difference. You know, there've been, we got a national police union, the Fraternal Order of Police. We know where they stand politically, and they make a big difference when you have an active union, when you've got a union contract that prohibits a police officer from being interviewed if he or she has used deadly force for a period of hours, which requires disciplinary records to be not available to the public, who talks about restricting the police chief from just about firing anybody in any circumstances.
Right.
There's that whole side of the thing, and then there's this crazy Supreme Court decision in Graham v. Connor, which talks about reasonable objectiveness, and essentially that boils down to, if you can prove to the court that you were frightened of your life, regardless of what outside experts may say, you get a pass.
Because you
And
believe that you were being reasonable, correct?
yes, that's right. Objective reasonableness, it's called, and it is.
Yeah.
But even with that, police departments could still raise the standard. When I went to Madison in 1972, the state law and most state laws throughout the nation gave police the authority to use deadly force in apprehending any fleeing felon, regardless of the crime. Okay, so we quickly figured out that, hey, we don't want our police officers shooting at stolen cars as the kids run away, and they're usually always kids. And
Right.
in theft situations and maybe burglaries and stuff, when people run away, we just don't want police shooting them in the back. So we made a rule, said you may not use your weapon, you may not use deadly force in these situations unless you can prove that this is a fleeing, dangerous felon that was going to harm the life of another person. So that
Yeah.
raised the standard big time. Okay, the law permitted this. So I couldn't take a police officer who violated that policy and say, take him to the DA, and the DA would say, wait a second, that's not against the law. So I would just have to fire them. So, and I don't think I ever had to because we said this is the rule and we're going to enforce this rule. And I was lucky enough to have a cadre of leaders in the organization that says, yeah, we'll back that up, chief. So I think that, it's going to be, as I said, the change in American policing is going to be, probably one police officer at a time, one heart at a time. Small cities can make big changes very, very quickly. And I think that, as I wrote a blog this morning that said, maybe I'm wrong, but is not the question out there from people of color, when are you going to stop killing us? Isn't that what's being asked? And how are we answering that? And I know sooner got the blog out that a very close friend of mine, did I tell you that story before? Was it here? That she called me and she said a black friend of hers
Yeah,
she worked
say
with.
it again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
Okay.
the story again, please.
Called her on the phone, and she'd worked with him for years. And he said to her, just after George Floyd was killed, they got on the phone together, and he said, my daughter just called me. My 20-something-year-old daughter just called me, and she said, Dad, when are they going to stop killing us? And I think that's a reasonable question today, and I think there's an answer out there. You got to raise the standard. We just can't do this. We cannot use deadly force to stop a kid who is mentally ill with a knife running down the street in our town. We've got to figure out something else. They don't kill those people, and I've seen enough videos in Europe. They don't kill people who are mentally ill who have sharp objects in their hands.
Yeah.
They just don't do that, and I don't think we can justify that. So I have said, well, if it's really, really dangerous, why can't we train on less than lethal shooting? And you think that I took away the Holy Grail and hid it. Oh, we cannot do that. Well, European police, a number of them train on less than deadly shooting. And you mean to say that you've got a clip of 14 rounds right here, 14 rounds, and you couldn't shoot somebody in the leg? No. They say, no, we can't. No. Center mass shooting. And that's why all these shootings end in deaths, because all the training is center mass. And that's where the heart and lungs are.
Okay. And then the center, is that, why aren't they training to shoot in the leg? Just because? That's just because the training is to shoot in the center of the mass?
Because if the person has a gun or a knife or something, he could still hurt you even if he's on the ground, type of thing. It's that, we have to have total control. Now the interesting thing is, please, the one, my great gift and my great burden is I've got all this lengthy experience from so many years. So we used to train when the only weapon we had to the firearm in the squad car was the shotgun. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so now it's the the semi-automatic rifle. But anyway, with shotguns, we would train in skipping buckshot rounds into the legs of people who had weapons.
And that was you training as a police officer.
Yeah,
That was you training as a police officer to shoot people in the leg with buckshots and a shotgun.
That's right.
Okay.
So there's no more buckshot around, and so,
so now you can't really do that training anymore because you're not using that weapon.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
We've got AR-15s. So I think since 9/11, when we were expected to have terrorist attacks at least on a weekly basis, we started outfitting police with a lot of extra weaponry, and that's where the mine-resistant armored vehicles came into communities, and so we had that iconic shot of Ferguson in 2014 of the St. Louis SWAT team arriving with their armored vehicle and officers on top with automatic weapons pointed at a protesting crowd.
Yeah.
Which had the authority under our Constitution. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights tell us that we have a right to assemble and petition the government to redress grievances. That was a really shocker that I think many people saw. But what's happened since that time? It's been 6 years now.
Yeah. I mean, no, we are, I don't know, we're in a very scrambled time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to close this out with some optimism. Like I said,
Sure.
This is kind of part one before we jump into part two of just your own kind of career.
Sure.
But what do you think are kind of the easiest? Okay, yeah. So here's the two questions. There's kind of small policing and then your larger cities. And I kind of mentioned like the opportunity for win-win solutions of both policing, but then also community, right? So, I don't want police to just get defunded. They don't have any more money, whatever. They're the bad guys now, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But where do you think the win-win opportunities are in small communities and your larger municipalities for
good
creating constructive change and
good question.
Safer cities and stuff like that.
All right, I've thought a lot about this, Joe, and I think it goes like this: if we, if community leaders, citizens, and cities are saying, well, what can we do? What can we do now? What I would like to see if I had my my dream is let's take a city like Minneapolis, and you say or any city, well, even Madison here. Hey, look we need to do a stand down. The military does stand downs. For example, if I remember one time I was orderly to a captain of our aircraft carrier, and he used to go into to fly at a base, and it was in California, and we came into the Naval Air Station, and it was shut down. And so I'm hearing the conversation, and the base commander came out to my captain. He said, well, we're shutting down. We've got some problems with some of the aircraft. So nobody's flying until we figure out how to solve this problem. Okay, a stand down. Well, I think a lot of our cities need to stand down. And it would be like this: if I was if I was king of the world, this is what I would say. Look, let's take a week and let's stand down and let's ask our surrounding municipalities to take our police calls for us. As a sheriff would come in, and we all need to get together, and we're going to spend a couple of days in a big convention center. Of course, this would have to be post-COVID, and we're gonna listen. We're gonna listen to the community. We're gonna listen to what they have to say, and officers, we're gonna say nothing. We're gonna listen, and we're gonna take notes, and we're not gonna get angry, and we're not going to
Yeah.
stand up and be defensive. We're going to listen to what is the kind of police they want in their communities and for their kids. What does that look like? What does it look like to have a number of people who are going to enforce the rules and laws of a democratic, free and diverse democratic society such as ours? And let's listen to that, and then let's talk amongst ourselves what we've heard, and let's make a proposal to the community, get back together and say, look, this is what we think we can do. Would you support us in doing this?
So first, kind of having that listening section of, hey, let's just let people talk because we're, here to serve the community anyways. And then come back with, okay, well, these are potential solutions to solve that. But there's a I completely agree with you. Where it's
that should be ongoing. I mean, a good police agency should do this all the time.
Yeah, and even just, I feel like the biggest gap, there's a really large gap of just communication, which creates these different silos, right?
Yes.
That there's community over here and there's police over here, and they're two separate islands when it's really, it's really the same system, same people, right? Those police are going even to sleep in those communities.
Now, having said that, what worries me is the polarization that goes on within our society right now. That people are going to take sides. Yeah. I'm in favor of the warrior cops. Well, we're in favor of the guardian cops. Well, you're no good, and we don't like you. And and we're in the midst of a national model right now of polarization, where we demonize the other side, not by their facts or by their argument, but because we think they're bad people. So we use the ad hominem. I'm not going to listen to you because well your kind of people aren't very good. And that's the danger we're in right now. And look at our Congress. I mean, so if we know who we are. So we need to break the mold and be a nation that listens to one another respectfully, celebrates our differences and really understand that it is diversity. That used to be one of our mottos in Madison. Diversity is our strength. Diversity is never a weakness. Diversity is a strength, because that's why we are so effective in doing the policing function, is because we are a diverse group of men and women.
To go back to, and we're about to close this out, so thanks for at least this part one. Don't worry, part two is going to be a lot shorter, but
we're going to do part two.
Yeah. Part two is just the individual stuff. Don't worry, it's going to be like it's just kind of your individual career and how you even decided to do this. But kind of to close this out, so it would be nice to have a mass, right? A big convention, lots of communication, lots of problem solving. But then, the easy argument back is, well, there's no budget, that's too hard. And so I'm wondering, what is the kind of, the smaller thing that wouldn't require so much logistics? Yeah. And if that's just like, going to more like small community meetings, like what's like the small version of that big solution?
Yeah. So I used to say that any organization over 500 individuals is unmanageable.
Yeah.
I mean, it just gets too big. It has its own culture. If we had to do two things, number one is we raise the standard for use of deadly force to the European standard of absolute necessity. And then we would specifically require police officers to intervene if somebody is doing something that's going to embarrass them, cause them to be disciplined, lose their job, or go to prison. And that we would buy into, if I am ever in that situation, I want you to do that to me too. Now, I say that, police say how much they love each other. I'd say, well, if you really loved each other, if you really honored and respect one another, you would make this pledge to each other that you would intervene before someone got into trouble.
Yeah. No, it's a really simple thing, and it is like, it's kind of what you need teamwork for anyways, is you need people to
Yeah,
help
exactly. If
watch
you're a
each other's
team,
backs.
that's right. If you're a team, that should fit really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the guy who did that in Minneapolis was a SWAT team supervisor. His name was Mike Quinn, and he took the SWAT team, which had all kinds of complaints against them. And the time that he was the commander, he did this peer intervention thing because they were a team and we did care for one another, and no complaints, no
Yeah.
citizen complaints after that.
Perfect.
I mean, if you see another officer start to get upset and start getting the fuse pretty short, you can, if you interview early, you don't really have a complaint from the citizen. It's just if you let it go too far and somebody gets injured, then there's trouble.
Oh,
Well,
completely. Well, thanks. Yeah, so this is the end of this kind of section. Don't worry, the next section is going to be really short, but it's just about kind of your own, like, it's your own kind of career and how you found what you love to do and stuff like that. So anyways, I'm going to end this call.
All right, sounds good, Joe. All right, thanks a lot. Enjoy talking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.